Good afternoon to all and greetings. Happy to be with you all on this particular favorite topic of mine, namely the outcome based education. And this has been the word outcome based education in India, at least, has been around since 2015 when the National Board of Accreditation has introduced formally that all programs, all colleges, at least engineering institutions, should conduct in the framework of outcome-based education. And of course, many people have been talking about it. There are courses offered. There are what do you call MOOC courses under NPTEL are being offered. A large number of people are working with this. This is just one more attempt in the same direction. So first thing is very simple thing. What is outcome-based education? We'll try to say it in very simple words. The crux of outcome-based education is to shift from the centricity of teacher to the student centricity. That is, you look at everything from the learner perspective rather than teacher perspective. It is not that teacher is unimportant. Teacher does play very central and key role in everything, or everything related to teaching and learning. But now you start using the language that we keep talking about. What is it that the students have learned? How do I facilitate him to learn? Instead of saying, what do I want him to learn, and so on. Okay. So it is essentially the essence of outcome-based education is shifting from teacher centricity to learner centricity, which is not anything new. People have been talking about it right from 70s. But somehow, though it found its it came into the general acceptance in 90s in Europe and USA, but even there, people talk about it, but it's not fully, what do you call, things haven't become that completely outcome-based education. We will worry about that and why is it so later. So outcome-based education is an approach to education in which all decisions on teaching and learning are driven by what you want your learners to be able to do at the end of learning experience. Okay, what is a learning experience? It could be a 4-year degree program or a 3-year degree program or a 1-semester course or even a small one unit in a course. It can be anything. So learning experience can be anything like this. We'll look at the complete program as well as course. So what outcome-based education is saying, at the end of your learning experience, what do I want my learners to be able to do, which they were not able to do prior to the learning experience. Unless they are able to do something different from what they have not been able to do, then what is the purpose of any teaching and learning? So we expect the students to be able to do something as a consequence of experiencing some learning. Okay, and it's fair, no? We are spending a lot of effort, time, and the students are sitting, learners are sitting, and either in a classroom or these days in front of their screens, in trying to listen to something. But at the end, if they're not able to do something which they're expected to do, then the learning experience is not of much value. Okay. So outcome-based education is an approach to education in which all decisions, we'll talk about what are all these decisions. What are these decisions? It is about the curriculum, or you can say content. instruction, that is how you teach or how you facilitate learning, and actually the assessment. These three are the key issues of any teaching and learning: curriculum, instruction, and assessment. So, all decisions about these three are done, are driven, are decided by what you want your learners to be able to do. Okay, that's what that is what is meant by outcome-based education, nothing else. Now, just a little bit of history. Back in 70s, people who were concerned with policies or administrators, various people, they wanted to measure what is it that the students are learning. For example, a student from school A easy learning something better than uh, the student from who is doing the same thing in school B. How do I compare two schools? Or and in the case of higher education institutions, is the particular institution doing okay? Is it satisfactory? So, how do you want to measure? It all depends on what is it that the learners are able to do. Learners of this particular school, or in what way they are different from the learners from another school. So it started with that, and then they wanted everybody to pay attention to this and say what exactly are the what is it that the students are learning. Essentially, it is that. And the term outcome based education was formally presented by William Spady back in 1994 through his book called Outcome Based Education, A Critical Issues and Answers. And it's a American Association of School Administrators. It is published by them. Now, most of the times in education, many things start with school because that is where the largest number of students are involved anywhere in the world. So, to the most of the research or most of the policies are first addressed there, and subsequently, some of those things kind of move towards the higher education as well. So, the first book on outcome based education is really at the school level. And what happened after 1994 book, the EBET, that is the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology of USA, in 1997, inspired by this outcome based education, they adopted engineering criteria called EC 2000. So they said engineers graduating by 2000 should be able to do certain things. And so they talked now, the graduates are the students. Now the shift is towards the students, in which focus now obviously has shifted from the inputs, what the material is taught, to the outcomes, what the students learned, right? I may teach lots of things, but the material that I'm teaching may be relevant, may not be relevant, or whether I'm presenting it in a very complicated, different way, and the students are not interested. But ultimately, the learners are not learning something. Then the whole purpose is gone for as far as education is concerned. So it is always good to look at it from what the student should be learning and then work backwards. That is the major shift. You don't say, I want to teach such and such subjects to students, because why? How do I make that decision? Not that you have any ulterior motive, but in the teacher's perspective, this is what you want your students to learn. And that's why but who makes that decision? It is generally the teachers, or let's say the members of the boards of studies. They decide what the student should ought to be learning, and that constitutes the curriculum, right? But now, instead of saying that, You now say what you want the students to be able to do at the end of the program. And that's what decides the, uh, what do you call, your content. Now, once again, the outcomes of learning are of considerable concern right from the, let's say, early part of 20th century. As long as systematic study of education is taking place, so the outcomes of learning was of concern to all people concerned with education. And that's why several terms have come into use. And these are some of the terms that we have got from the literature. They include the words like outcomes, learning outcomes, intended learning outcomes, instructional objectives, educational objectives, behavioral objectives, performance objectives, and so on. There is a whole bunch of them that they have come. And some people prefer to use some of these things rather than simply learning outcomes. Okay. Now, the most popular one around the world is the learning outcomes. Okay. What are the outcomes of learning? That's what we want to talk about. And now we try to define what is the learning outcome. An outcome is what the learner will be able to do or perform at the end of some learning experience. That's what we have already stated. But now we are now talking about, because learning can take place either through a formal program, like attending a 3-year degree program or a 4-year degree program, or it could be postgraduate program, and so on. And also learning can take place all the time as we are continuously interacting with our environment and with other people all the time, whether professionally we are working, whatever we say, we are continuously are learning. We are continuously are interacting with the world. As a consequence of that, we are learning. But now, when we are talking about all this outcome based education, we are talking about the context of formal education. That is, the learners are part of a formal program, which may be anywhere from school to a PG program, right? And that's what in the first, right in the first slide, we talked about. An outcome is what the student should be able to do at the end of a program or a course or an instructional unit. Now, when we write these outcomes, then what happens? You can use this to communicate with all the stakeholders. In a formal education, who are the stakeholders? The stakeholders are students, the teachers, the management of an institution, and then you have the university or the bodies like the University Grants Commission, National Board of Accreditation, AICTE, industry which employs the graduates, parents who send their wards to this. All these are stakeholders. Now, each stakeholder may look at education in her or in their own way. So how do these people communicate with each other? And these outcome, if you write your outcome statements unambiguously on a piece of paper, and the institution is saying, this is what my graduates learn, then somebody, other stakeholder can comment on that, can agree or give some inputs, can argue about it. So the outcomes also provide a basis for an effective interaction among the stakeholders. Okay. Mind you, these are all, they look pretty simple and obvious, but actually this kind of proper interaction among the stakeholders doesn't take that very easily in a formal way. And in outcome-based education now, the major difference is product defines the process. What does it mean? I want my learners, students, should be able to do something at the end of a course or at the end of a program. That's the product. what kind of capabilities the student has, that becomes the product. And now, having defined the product, then I come backwards and say, what kind of processes that I use to facilitate my student to achieve that particular goal. Whereas it is the opposite of what we call input based education, where the emphasis is on the teaching and the system is happy to accept whatever is the result. In olden days, what happened is there was no particular time limits. There is no particular pace, or the amount of knowledge that needs to be picked up is somewhat limited. So you have a whole lot of other issues. That's why the time was not a major factor. If you everybody talks about old Gurukul system, in Gurukul a student continues to be with the teacher until the teacher declares that the student has learned. And students are also willing to accept that different people will graduate from Gurukul at different times. But that kind of thing is not acceptable anymore. We have all our programs are formal, whether it is school or college level, everything is limited time. So one will have to be very careful in defining the product. That is what the student should be able to do. Whereas we were following, the teachers decide these are all the things my students have to learn. Or not my students, the students who graduate from engineering program should learn all this. They decide on that and then keep teaching towards that. So you're deciding everything based on the content, not what the learners should be able to do. So, and then what happens? You keep on teaching. Sometimes you may be able to properly complete the syllabus that you have in mind, or you may not. Sometimes you hurry, or sometimes you stop at some place, and then you test the student whether the student has learned something. Okay, so that was the thing that even today, even all the higher education, much that is what you call tier one institutions or the top institutions in the country, still they follow the same kind of method. Things work out because the faculty are extremely well qualified, the facilities are fantastic, and the students enter into these programs after heavy filtering. Everything is nice. In that, anything that is done generally works. But if you extend the same thing to other institutions, the same results may not really happen. Okay? So it is outcome based education. It is opposite of input based education, and the main characteristic is product defines the process. First, define what is the product that you want, and then work backwards. Now, what are the advantages of this OBE, which we have already explained? An explicit statement of what the educational process aims to achieve clarifies the curriculum to both students and teachers and provides a focus for teaching and learning. That is, I'm communicating to the student right in advance, this is what I'm expecting you to be able to do. And that kind of clarity will make a lot of difference to the students. Not only students, but other stakeholders as well. And it also provides a kind of a framework for integration of the curriculum. If we have time, we will look at how the integration of the curriculum, how this provides a good framework for integration of the curriculum. And it also acts as a guide for assessment. We will not have too much of time for looking at the assessment part. That will constitute a separate session. It facilitates curriculum evaluation. Now, we say we are conducting a BE program. Is the program good, or is it done well? How do we decide? I must have some basis. For example, if I say 80% of my students have got first class, is that a satisfactory indication? It depends on on what basis you are giving first class or second class. What kind of tests have you conducted? How did you evaluate? For example, some practices, strange practices have come into our education system where you give marks if the students have some assistant attendance to the class above 75%. What kind of evaluation is that? To give marks for just being in the classroom. That has nothing to do just because you're in the classroom. It doesn't guarantee that the student has learned. So, uh, so you have to be very clear to measure the quality of learning. And that's what the OBE and the accreditation mechanisms try to establish. And now there have been reservations about OBE by quite a few faculty, especially from better institutions, IITs, NITs. These institutions, they say, no, don't. It is anything, any kind of framework, anything that you say, it is against the spirit of education, without saying what that spirit of education is. That is, one wants absolute freedom. Let's say everybody is interested in some topic, so the teacher decides to spend any amount of time on that topic at the cost of some other topics. Is that the spirit of education? I do not know. So they want total freedom, and no one should say anything about what the teacher should do or how something should happen in the classroom. That is a prerogative of the teacher. And some people go to the extent of saying that it's a straitjacket, which is quite unfair because the all academic decisions, what you want your students to be able to do, or how do you instruct, how do you assess, everything is in the hands of the teacher. Even then, people call it a straitjacket. Okay, so please, and in institutions like what do you call tier 2 institutions or quite a few other institutions, people consider it as a lot of documentation overload. We are all asked to produce this kind of document, that kind of document, calculate this, calculate that. Other than producing the lot of documentation overload, it didn't add any value. Okay, the simple answer to the documentation overload, please use the commercially available tools that removes the documentation overload. A teacher need not do anything extra other than generally what he would do anyway otherwise. Teach in the class, conduct tests, evaluate the performance, and then give some marks, record it somewhere. These are all needs to be done. And other than this, a teacher need not do anything specially because it's OBE or accreditation, and they are better done or better left to the tools that now we have. Now we come to how should an outcome statement be kind of written, or is there any structure to that? First thing is, it should unambiguously state what the student should be able to do or perform. That is the first requirement. It should be unambiguous. Okay, we will look at, when we look into the details, what do you mean? Where does the ambiguity come? What the students do or perform are observable and measurable. If we merely say the student should know, how do you, knowing is some internal change in the mind. If we say no, how do I measure that he knows it or not? As a consequence of his knowing, he should be able to perform, he should be able to do something. And that is what you have to write rather than merely say no. Okay. And and then also it should not be written in such a complicated language that the student himself or herself may not be able to understand. That's why you call it comprehensible. It should be written in related subject-based terminology and in simple language. And it should also kind of be, the statement should also act as a guide to students in planning their own learning. Because everything is not the learning by a student is not always to the 100% by what happens in the classroom. Some students explore on their own. Sometimes they may not pay attention in the classroom. Then they outside the classroom they may talk to their peers or go to the library and explore and so on. But in whatever manner the student is learning, these outcome statements will also act as guides. And these are at least some of the features of an outcome statement. Now, these are the three statements which we consider central to anything in education. That the students learn well when they're clear about what they should be able to do at the end of a course. Let's say our unit of learning is a 1-semester course. And when the students are very clear about what they should be able to do at the end of a course, and how do they know that they're able to do that? We generally use the assessment. That is, we conduct tests, ask them to do some assignments or do some experiments, write some reports, make presentations, and so on. You have various assessment instruments, but these assessment should be in alignment with what they're expected to do. Simple thing is, let's say somebody is conducting a test for you to drive a car. So how do I assess? You cannot ask him the theory about how the brake works, how the IC engine works, and so on. We may directly ask him to drive the car, right? So the assessment should be in alignment with what they're expected to do. If the test is to test whether the learner is capable of driving a car, my assessment should also be to test him for driving a car. That's it. And then what happens is, to prepare the student for that, my instructional activities are to be designed and conducted so that the learners are able to actually perform those things. I may do a good job, bad job, average job. Students may be good or average, whatever the issue, that I plan my instructional activities or conduct instructional activities in such a way the students are facilitated to be able to demonstrate what they're expected to achieve. That's what these are the three elements of main elements of teaching and learning. Okay, outcomes, assessment, and instruction. Now, this is what engineering education has practiced until 2015. So here is the institution. Right now, I'm taking the example of undergraduate engineering programs. It will also equally applicable to the other 3-year general degree programs and so on. And graduates of 12th standard enter this program. Whatever mechanisms that you have here, or whatever filtering mechanisms you have, graduates of 12th standard come here. And this is the institution. The activities of the institutions are influenced or sometimes directly controlled by the university, state government, AICTE, NBA, industry, parents, These days, parents are more knowledgeable, or at least they think they know better. They make the decisions about to which college or which institution they should send their wards to. And in the recent past, the technology is also playing a major role, started playing a major role because there is a continuous improvements in the ICT technologies, and these have significant role to play. And this institution produces engineering graduates. And what kind of graduates? Who pass the exams? That's it. Earlier, prior to 2015, there was nothing else that was the issue. So engineering graduates means passing the exams. But once they pass the exam, uh, there are many things which are not directly under the control of the institution. And the graduates seek either placement, majority of them seek placement, and a few go for higher education, and then you have very, very small percentage will directly enter entrepreneurship. But these are all decided by social factors, economic factors, and market factors. For example, there was not much recruitment in the year 2000 when the students are supposed to have graduated. But that is not the fault of the institute, not fault of the students, but that is a market factor. The companies were not able to recruit adequately. So these factors will decide. These are not necessarily in the control of the institute. And now the institution should develop an understanding of all these factors and possibly keep adjusting their curricula, which is not that very easy, and try to see that when they graduate, you are they're able to, the students are able to get better placements. But mind you, understanding these factors and getting incorporating them into the curriculum, and by the time they graduate, there is a large time lag. Minimum 4 years, generally, it's a lot more. Okay, and the institution has to constantly keep adjusting, and some of these adjustment processes are also kind of pushed by these government bodies as well. Okay. Now, what are all these outcomes? There are 4 outcomes. There are 3 levels, as we call them. First thing is they're called program educational objectives. So PEOs are broad statements that describe the career and professional accomplishments in 4 to 5 years after the graduation that the program is uh, preparing the students. For example, let's say I design a mechanical engineering program. And then what do I have? And practically all the graduates go into, let's say, IT industry. And the kind of, even in the IT, whatever they're doing may or may not have any relevance at all to the 4 years of activity they have. That means the program and what the students are doing have no correlation. Then what is the program for? So the program educational objectives, if I am training somebody as a civil engineer, is he involved in some civil engineering activities? By and large, we are not saying 100% should do that. But by and large, the graduates of civil engineering programs, are they involved in activities that are related to civil engineering? After 4 to 5 years. After 5 years, what happens is a very different issue because there are so many other issues come into picture. And that is what is called program educational objectives. Generally, a program should write about up to a maximum of 5 statements, 5 objectives to describe that program. Okay. Now, next is, this is 4 to 5 years after graduation. But now we talk about by the time they graduate, at the time of graduation, what is it that the student should be able to do? After all, irrespective of the discipline that he is graduating from, whether a civil, mechanical, electrical, whatever you have, they're all becoming some kind, they're entering into some profession, right? Or even for higher education. But whatever be the activity, they need to have some common characteristics. Okay? They need to, all graduates should need to have some common characteristics, like they should be able to work in a team, they should be able to communicate, they should learn how to learn, and so on. These are many characteristics that every graduate should have, and these are stated as program outcomes. So, program outcomes POs are statements that describe what the students graduating from engineering program should be able to do at the time of graduation, which is in the hands of the institution. And in case of engineering, these program outcomes are stated by National Board of Accreditation. So each institution cannot define for itself. Generally, that is true of all professional programs. You cannot say, let's say, take something like dentistry. It's a program, professional program. Each institution cannot say how I want my dentist, what kind of skills and knowledge the graduate should have. Generally, in professional programs, some professional agency will identify what they should be able to do. But whereas in case of engineering, you have so many branches, in addition to these POs, which are common across all disciplines, each program, because civil engineering, the kinds of things a civil engineering graduate should be able to do will obviously differ from a graduate of electrical and electronic engineering will be able to, right? So that's why you now talk about program specific outcomes. They are statements that describe what the graduates of a specific engineering program should be able to do at the time of graduation. Here, in case of engineering, these are about 12 statements that are given by 12, which is fairly large number, but is also ambitious. 12 program outcome statements are given by NBA. One has no choice whether you like them or not. They're given to us, and each institution will have to attempt to attain them. Whereas program specific outcomes, one can be slightly, they need not be identical from one college to the other. Depending on the faculty that you have or the resources that you have, the context in which you're operating, you can slightly make these program specific outcomes somewhat different. They can be used for differentiating your own program. These need to be something like 2 to 4 statements, not more than that. Then comes the course outcomes. They are statements that describe what the student should be able to do at the end of a course. So these are the, I do not want to call all of them as levels, but these are 3 levels of outcomes. Let us look at this picture. It may or may not be very clear. You have vision of the institute and mission of the institute, which you have to write. We are not going through the accreditation mechanisms now. So together they decide the vision and mission of the department. And this will lead to program educational objectives. And generally, these are written by some department advisory board or board of studies, whatever you have. And they in turn will identify the program specific outcomes. And the National Board of Accreditation identifies the program outcomes. And these two together, POs and PSOs together, will decide the curriculum. Okay. And the curriculum consists of various curricular components. These are also identified by NBA. And other than project, practically all of them are addressed through courses. So this number of courses here can be as many as 30 to 40 in a 4-year program. And each course is described in terms of course outcomes. So this is the broad framework, OBE, NBA framework as we call it, where the outcomes or objectives are all defined. And this is what slightly makes the earlier relationship somewhat different. I just for tentatively have shifted from here to here. Otherwise, up to this point, it remained the same. But now you say engineering graduates with defined abilities. We are not saying merely people who graduate. Their defined abilities are written in terms of POs, PSOs, and COs. And PEOs is something different. We are talking about 4 years from hence. Tentatively, let us keep this aside. And again, this part remains the same. So the major difference here is instead of describing graduates as merely people who passed, we are now saying that people who acquire these abilities, which are stated in terms of POs, PSOs, and COs. Now, maybe let me just pause a little bit and ask you if you have any question or any comment at this stage.
So we have one question.
Yes.
So in Autonomous Institute, is it mandatory to map all program outcomes with course outcomes at higher level?
No. No. If you are talking about higher levels in the context of Bloom's taxonomy or presently what is followed, higher levels refer to that. The nature of the course will decide at what level, what Bloom's level you are going to map. Okay. Sometimes you have a simply descriptive course like material science. In material science, most of the material science courses that I know of, they are limited to the first 2 levels only. There is not even any calculations, any apply level involved. So it is wrong to say that all courses should be, especially in autonomous institution, they should be mapped at higher levels. Yeah, that part will become clear when we take up that taxonomy a little later. Does that answer?
So the next, Mr. Venkata, sir, if you could answer.
Yeah, please. What is the question?
So we have next question. So whether outcome should be based on course or student?
Well, whether it is based on the student or the course.
Yes.
Generally, you don't have that kind of freedom saying everything with respect to the students. Okay, if you are calling a graduate an engineer, BE, he or she must have some abilities, right? I'll take very poor students and say, okay, my students can only learn this much, so I will limit myself to this. And I will still call him an engineer after 4 years. No. So you have to, but let's say a graduate from a very, very poor engineering college and a top IIT, though both of them get BA degrees, they are not at the same level, right? They're very different. So the purely, what do you call, No country can differentiate, I can say, BE with some marks attached to every graduate kind of thing. So it's a kind of a compromise. I call a IIT topper as also a BTech, and a just passed from a poor engineering college also a BE or BTech. So they're accepted. So a country as such a country as large as India, or for that matter anywhere in the world. Now, not only in India, as when we became part of Washington Accord, any BTech from India is also accepted as a BTech or BE in all the signatory countries. There are about 18 countries, which will include all many European countries as well as USA. They accept our graduates as equivalent to their approximate. But you cannot write outcomes just based on your students. You have to be selective with respect to your students. Yes, there are issues with respect to selecting students, but at the first level, approximately the kind of things that students learn in a top institution and a tier two poor institution should be nearly in some kind of a ballpark area. Okay?
Sir, we have 179 questions which have been asked in
Oh,
our
wow, wow.
registration form. Yes.
We
So,
will, okay,
yes.
if you
So
have
we
to
will,
a few later, okay?
yes, sir, later. Done.
Let's continue.
Yes, sir.
Now, we have already defined what a PEO is. Uh, they are broad statements that describe the career and professional accomplishment in 4 to 5 years after graduation that the program is preparing graduates to achieve. Here is a sample. This sample is something that we are giving it to you. It doesn't mean that every college will have to write this. Solve problems of social relevance, applying the knowledge of electrical and electronic engineering, and or pursue higher education and research. Each institution is at liberty to write the way they want this kind of statements. Whether you want to break them into two different statements or integrate, add more features to this is all up to your choice. As you can see, this is meant for electrical and electronic engineering. These are, uh, that means the graduates are involved in uh, solving problems of social relevance. It could be just managing a substation in an electrical network, or there in some industry, some factory, you are maintaining the equipment, or in some other company, you are designing a motor, whatever that you are, but you are solving problems of social relevance, applying the knowledge of electrical and electrical engineering. Sometimes you pursue higher education and research as well. This is one kind of description. Now, uh, I will not describe in detail at this point of time. If you have some time, we'll come back. PMOs are statements that describe what the knowledge and skills and attitude students should be able to demonstrate at the time of graduation from an engineering program, any engineering program for that matter, not just one engineering program. They are 12 in number. They are identified by NBA and are applicable to all UG engineering programs. And in case of general programs from that is non-engineering type of things, the university or institution, they need to identify these POs. They are not universal across. But once again, restricting ourselves to engineering, they are 12 in number. They are given by NBA. Okay. They address both disciplinary. That means in an engineering, what are you trying to do? You're solving specific engineering specific problems. You're designing something. You're conducting experiments, and you're using variety state of the art tools. All this There are only 5 in number. Out of the 12, 5 POs talk about the disciplinary one. The other 7 are professional competencies. That means whatever profession that you go into, these are relevant. For example, all professions, you have to work in a team, right? No activity gets done by a single person. So one should be able to be an effective team member. And as we know, many of us have experiences. Some people are tough when you want to work with them because they have their own idiosyncrasies, their own insistences. That means they're not necessarily good team members, but all engineers should also be a good team members. So becoming a good team member is one of the professional competency. Okay? Like that, there are 7 in number. Out of the 12, mind you, only 5 are disciplinary and 7 are non-disciplinary or professional. And this is where our most of the engineering programs differ from all the earlier until 2015. Even now, the engineering teachers are not too concerned. When they look at the program or the curriculum, they only worry about engineering. Obviously, the fact that the graduates have to become professionals, that somehow wasn't part of our curriculum design. Even if it is taken into consideration, it is only peripherally as a concession rather than, really speaking, looking at it. Even today, all curricular design suffer from this particular thing, that they want to teach more and more and more engineering subjects because that is what engineering is all about. The fact that they have to become professionals and they have to have these professional competencies is yet not sunk into our what we call boards of studies who design the curriculum. I can assure you with my personal experience with at least 30, 40 boards of studies, this issue is not yet satisfactorily resolved. Okay. Now, here I am giving these 12 statements given by NBA. I will not go through them completely. Maybe if we are left with a little time, I will revisit them. As I mentioned, this is how it is written. Okay, let's move on. Move on a little bit. Sorry for that, because we have limited time. Whereas PSOs, program specific outcomes, are outcomes that are specific to a program. And these things only should refer to the core courses. Because if I write some outcomes from electives, but all students are not taking the same electives by definition, right? So to that extent, I have to, my PSOs should only represent the core courses. Not that the electives are unimportant, but as far as writing PSOs are concerned, they should represent only the core courses or core activities. Core activity could be a project. Okay? And they can only be 2 to 4 in number as per the requirement of MBA. And as we said, PSOs can be used to differentiate the program. If I have a specialist laboratory in my engineering department for whatever reasons, and I want to characterize my graduates through that particular specialization, but all students do take that, okay? It comes into the core course. So it can be used to differentiate the program. And now here are the sample of EEE. This is how we write. Specify, architect, and analyze power systems that efficiently generate, transmit, and distribute electrical power in the context of the present day ICT. Okay. Now, if you look at any electrical engineer should be able to identify about half a dozen core courses that are related to this particular PSO. Okay, again, I will not spend time in analyzing these PS4s now. Now, coming to the course outcomes, they are what the students are required to do at the end of a course, which we have already stated. They should be measurable and observable. Uh, and what happens is, the difference is, as you can see, any undergraduate program, while it has to meet POs and PSOs, they have to only do it through core activities and core courses. So these POs and PSOs are not separately are not being addressed. They have to be addressed through core activities. To that extent, every course will have to address some of the POs and PSOs. Now, do they address all PO? Every course will it address all POs and PSOs? Certainly not. They can only address a subset of POs and PSOs. So to that extent, every course outcome needs to be tagged with the PSOs and PSOs that are specifically addressed. They have to be tagged. That is, we will see that how the tagging needs to be represented. Okay. And now they also have to be tagged with what we call cognitive level, knowledge categories, number of classroom sessions, number of lab hours, and so on. Why they are required, we'll presently see. Now, let me once more pause, take at least one question, not hundreds of questions, one question before we proceed.
Right, sir. So today we have audiences from arts, science colleges as well as engineering colleges.
Wow.
So yes, so the one question that is being repeatedly asked what is the difference for arts and science colleges? What is the level being followed in the arts, science, commerce colleges as well? Is there any limit? And what are the minimum number of POs and POs that should be there for a course?
The second part, I will, anyway, we will come to that. As I said, for arts and science programs, the POs are not given by any professional society. Because the graduate of a art and science program, let's say somebody who has done BA in politics or BA in literature, they do not, there is no guarantee that they will stay within that particular discipline. Okay? So, uh, unlike professional courses, generally somebody who spent a lot of effort and time, let's say doing chartered accountancy, is unlikely shift into, let's say, in literature, right? It is unlikely to happen. So most of the graduates of professional programs, they stay with that, let's say 95% of them. Whereas that cannot be stated with respect to the what I don't want to call it non-professional, general programs. 3-year degree programs can be considered general. These days, even the general programs, some of them are going to be a 4-year duration. By 3 to 4-year general programs, they also, all the graduates will have to have some common characteristics. But which are the common characteristics you want them to have? That is in the realm of the institution or the university. If it is an autonomous institution, the institution will have to define these common POs for all their programs, whether it is BSc Physics or BA in Politics. Graduates of these two programs will have the same set of characteristics, and PSOs will define what their particular program is. That is how they have to be handled. Whereas university may define, in India, as you know, too many colleges are affiliated to a single university, hundreds of colleges, and the university may define, the board of studies, whatever academic council of the university will define what these POs are. We have created a resource document on these POs for these general programs, which can be used if somebody wants. They can write to us. We'll share the document with you. Okay. I hope that answers
Great.
the question.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So, should we take one more question?
Okay, if you say so.
Okay, sir. So, one question that has been asked in the form as well: how to map the calculations for language papers COs with majors paper COs? Something related to co-curricular courses that the institution has. So, how do we map COs for them?
Now, the language courses, if they're compulsory, they have to. They are part of the. They are the core courses. So to that extent, they have. They will follow the same thing. Language courses as well. But if they have extracurricular and co-curricular activities, you have to find a way where all students are involved. But it is very
Okay.
difficult to find a co-curricular activity where 100% of the students are involved. You have to plan your activities in such a way, even though the activities are slightly different, but the context, the kind of outcomes that you are trying to attain through them should be most similar, something like that. There are no universal solutions. You should be able to convince some committee, yes, my students have participated in extracurricular activities and they have attained these outcomes.
Right.
Okay,
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
thank you. Now we move on to actual course outcomes because that was a requirement. Uh, Now, when we write something, we need to have some kind of a structure. How do I write course outcomes? Unfortunately, even around the world, if you watch out, they somehow have not bothered to prescribe a structure to writing a course outcome statement. And I've surveyed several US universities, European universities. When you put a bunch of them together, they are written very intuitively. There is no need to write intuitively, there can be a structure. And where does this structure come from? Some kind of a taxonomy of learning that if you use, which is well accepted. And in India, you know already that the Bloom's taxonomy has been by and large accepted, though officially it is not stated. Everybody is familiar with that. I hope most of the participants in this are familiar with that. And using this taxonomy, one should be able to write through a structure, we can write the course outcomes statements. Okay. Now, there are several taxonomies, Bloom, Solo, Fink, Gagne, Marzano, and etc. We are not going to make a list of them. And why should we have so many taxonomies? Because they're trying to map how the brain is functioning. What do you mean by how do I classify learning? Is it based on some structures in the brain? But our understanding of the brain is so poor or so little, you cannot come from purely from biology or the structure of the brain. And that's why different people, depending on observing the student behaviors, they came with uh, the different taxonomies. Even if you compare them, you can have some advantages, disadvantages, vaguenesses, and all that kind of thing. But it is the Bloom's taxonomy that kind of stood the uh, is widely accepted, and it's also a kind of withstood the time, right? It started in 1956, and even today, though it is slightly revised in the year 2000, uh, so we call it it's revised Bloom's taxonomy, and it holds good. It seems to satisfy many requirements, but there is one issue. The original Bloom's taxonomy supposed that any task it favors one of the three psychological domains, namely cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Okay, any activity that you do, Like, for example, while I am speaking and my interaction with you is dominantly cognitive, there is also an affective dimension. You are emotively reacting to what I am saying, whether you like it, don't like it, or you have all kinds of your own emotions going through, which you cannot prevent. That's the way brain functions. And similarly, like I am somehow using a few gestures, which is a psychomotor. Okay. So to that extent, all the activities in all the three domains are involved. One will dominate over the other in a given particular instance. And right now, we are not going to look at affective and psychomotor. It doesn't mean they're unimportant. They're very, very important. But really speaking, in affective domain, we really do not know how to address this satisfactorily. We know something about it, but we do not know how to. Some teachers intuitively, without using any terminology, they seem to understand the emotions of the students and they seem to take care of some of the things. Anyway, leaving that, our most of it is cognitive domain. And the cognitive domain in our revised Bloom's taxonomy uh, says there are two dimensions to that. And one is cognitive process, the other is knowledge dimension. There are two dimensions to this. And if you look at either the Fink or Gagne or Marzano, if you look at, they combine these uh, the cognitive process and knowledge and somehow convert into unidimensional and make a mix of that and give you one unidimensional one. Whereas by keeping these two dimensions as orthogonal or separate from each other, you get a much better picture in my view, and that's how the revised Bloom's taxonomy is valid. Okay, here the two dimensions of revised Bloom's taxonomy. There are cognitive processes. There are 6 of them. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And there are 4 categories of knowledge: factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive. And I think many of you are familiar with these. So I think I will skip going through the details with your permission because we have only 15-20 minutes left. So you have remember, then you have understand, and in the revised Bloom's taxonomy, understand is divided into use 7 sub-processes. That means when I say it belongs to understand, I'm doing any of these things. Okay, and then apply. I'm using some procedure to perform exercises or solve problems. And that's what we mean by that. And each one of these cognitive processes is associated with what we call action verbs. We start any statement with the action verb like determine, calculate, compute, like that. In case of understand, we use any of these kind of action verbs: translate, illustrate, categorize, find a pattern, contrast, compare, this kind of thing. Okay. So every cognitive activity can be characterized by a set of action verbs. And I'm leaving it to you. These slides are available to all of you. If you have any further issues, we'll interact later. And analyze is a little difficult thing mainly because analyze, we have been using this word, all teachers have been using this in a very loose sense. Let's analyze this. It can mean many things and it can mean different things in different contexts. Whereas the revised Bloom, analyze has a very, very specific meaning. And that meaning is what you need to internalize. So I strongly urge all faculty to spend adequate time in understanding what analyze is. And when you are trying to write outcomes or trying to operate within outcome-based education, you should use the word analyze in strictly in Bloom's sense, not in a loose way. Not that the earlier one was bad. That had been the practice earlier, but now that we are coming into OBE framework, you should use the word analyze strictly in the sense of Bloom. Okay, so I will not elaborate on analyze. And in the case of engineering subjects, analyze is less applicable because the nature of the subject matter itself is very well organized. In the sense, there is no need to kind of keep on looking at assumptions and so on. Whereas in the case of general programs, if you are talking about, let's say, English literature or politics or history, analyze is there everywhere. Absolutely, because you have to constantly keep looking at it. What is the opinion of the author? Why is he saying so? My opinion is this. So the analyze activity can be very strong in general programs, whereas it is very difficult to justify in majority of the engineering courses. Okay. Evaluate is another one, and you are making judgments. Once again, evaluate can be has a strong role in general programs rather than in engineering courses. It will have a role to play if during your projects, or mini projects or major projects and so on. And then you have create. Once again, create, it can be a generating like a hypothesis or predict or coming out with a new principle and so on, or just merely design something, or you're actually physically producing something. So they can be any of these three activities. So let's there are all the 6 cognitive processes. When it comes to knowledge, categories of knowledge, we have already mentioned these are the 4 categories of knowledge. I will not elaborate them now. And in the case of engineering, we would like to suggest 4 more categories of knowledge, which makes engineering different from other courses. Whereas unfortunately for all other other professional disciplines, people haven't been able to satisfactorily identify any additional categories of knowledge. In the case of engineering, yes. Once again, I'm not elaborating why I'm trying to create a justification for them. Okay, so these are the 4 categories of knowledge. Once again, we assume that all of you are familiar with these 4 categories of knowledge. If you have any issue, we'll spend some time on that. And having now accepted 6 cognitive processes and 4 categories of knowledge, they can be captured because they're 2-dimensional. I capture them in the form of a table. So we call it revised Bloom taxonomy table. So any activity that I have, it's a cognitive process. That is, either I'm remembering, understanding, applying, or any of that activity, and I'm operating that. I'm remembering either factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, or procedural knowledge, or metacognitive knowledge. So what happens, any activity can be located in one of these cells. And this table it can come handy for several things. Okay. So we talk about, first of all, most important one is alignment. Assessment should be in alignment with course outcomes. So what does it mean? Instruction should be in alignment with assessment. And this alignment can be described here. For example, if my course outcome is located in this particular cell, I am understanding a concept or a set of concepts. If I'm here, my assessment should also be here. It cannot be here, or it cannot be here. And my instruction also should be here, because I'm trying to facilitate my student to understand the concepts at consideration. Okay, and that's what constitutes the alignment. And now coming to the courses, you can have under the current choice-based credit system, whether it is general or professional uh, programs, you can have courses of any type like this: 3 is to 0 is to 0, or 2 is to 0, 2 is to 2, 0 is to 0 is to 1, like that. You have a whole possibilities that exist. Whether your boards of studies are willing to effectively utilize them or not, that is a different story. Okay, but systems now, University Grants Commission and both AICTE permit you to have these courses. Now, we come to the most important part. What is the structure of a CO statement? It consists of 4 parts. Action, which represents the cognitive, affective, psychomotor activity learner should perform. And action is indicated by or represented by concerned cognitive process. Okay, that is action. And then you are performing that on some knowledge elements, right? The knowledge represents the specific knowledge from any one or more of the 4 knowledge categories. And then what happens, you have to perform this action sometimes under specified conditions. Sometimes you may not have any condition specified. To that extent, condition becomes optional. If one can include a condition, if you are including it, it's perfectly fine. If it is not there also, it is fine. That's why it is optional. And also what happens, this action that you are expecting the student to perform, it should fulfill certain criteria. Let's say I want my student to compute a root of a polynomial to second decimal place. If I want him to do that, then that criteria needs to be fulfilled. If it is not accurate up to second decimal place, the performance is not acceptable. Or if I want my student to measure something in the laboratory up to a certain level of accuracy, then that is the criteria. So, but this also, it may or may not exist with respect to every CO. So to that extent, this is also an option. So there are 4 elements, 2 compulsory and 2 are optional. Okay, let's look at some samples very quickly. Calculate major and minor losses associated with fluid flow in piping networks. So when I look at it, calculate is the first one. Generally, all CO statements start with an action verb. Calculate. It belongs to the cognitive process apply. And major and minor losses associated with fluid flow in piping networks, it is both conceptual and procedural. Okay. These 2 are compulsory, but right now I did not put any condition nor specified any criteria. Okay. If I take another one, determine the dynamic unbalanced conditions of a given mechanical system of rigid objects subject to force and acceleration. This can come in a physics course as well, or mechanics course in civil engineering or mechanical engineering and so on. So once again, determine the action verb. It belongs to the apply cognitive process, and knowledge dynamic unbalanced conditions. It is conceptual and procedural, and there is a condition. I am determining these unbalanced conditions for a given mechanical system of rigid objects, not any other arbitrary objects. So to that extent, this becomes a condition, and criterion is none. I'm not giving you other examples. Purely, there are a little bit of dynamics related to how to do, how not to do. I will leave it to you to read this and don't make these mistakes. And every time you write a course outcome, please check it against this checklist before you write. And finally, this is how you write outcomes of a course. Now, CO1, illustrate the terminology of mechanisms. Let us come here. Identify the degrees of freedom and motion characteristics of planar mechanisms. And now it is addressing PO1 and PSO1. Okay. And cognitive level is understand you. And knowledge categories belong to conceptual and procedural. And I'm trying to take, I need to take something like 5 class sessions. And if my lab is associated with this, just a minute. Oops. I have some number here, okay? Sorry. So here, for example, again, once again, PO1, PSO1, and predict the motion of planar mechanisms that will come under the apply category, AP, and conceptual, procedural. I'm proposing to take, this is based on our previous experience, how many sessions you are likely to have. So to that extent, every CO will not take the same amount of time. Okay? And I'm going to have 2 hours of laboratory. Like this, the entire course can be captured through a set of course outcomes and tagged with POs and PSOs and cognitive level knowledge categories, class sessions. This is a tutorial, not lab actually, tutorial. Okay. Now, sorry, I'm rushing through because of the time limitation. Normally, we take 3 hours for this minimum, sometimes even more, because we have, and I was expected to kind of address all these dimensions. I had to rush through. Sorry for that. If you have any questions or any comments, I would be happy to answer.
So firstly, we've received an amazing feedback from our audiences. They are very happy for your, enlightening us and sharing all those details, going to the very basics. You've helped us understand each and every pointer. I would now request the audiences, if you have any questions, apart from the ones that you've shared, to kindly share it in the chat box. And we'll try to take any 3 to 4 of them, because respecting sir's time here. And sir, we would definitely want you back another time on higher education conclave, because 1 hour, 1.5 hours is not able to do justice to the content and the experience
you
that
want
you have.
everything to be done in a short period of time.
It's not possible, I understand.
You can share these slides with all the participants.
Yes, sir, I'll do that.
And if anyone is interested in any additional material,
right,
a lot of resource material prepared already, I can share.
Okay. That would be great, sir. That would be great. We have a WhatsApp group, sir, because we are not able to communicate on mail at times. So we have a WhatsApp group where we keep on sharing educational material and the different conclaves that we have. So we will share the material over there. Sir, one question which was asked, so now, so the new education policy has been defined. So, sir, so how will NBA or OBE change with respect to the new education policy, sir?
As far as I understand, new education policy doesn't touch the OBE part. Okay, they are talking more about how the institutions should be reorganized. They want more and more autonomy for more and more institutions to become autonomous. Or if they can't, individual institutions cannot become autonomous, they can form a local cluster and become autonomous. And either a cluster or an institution should have a minimum of 3,000 students, and a future institution should be multidisciplinary, not just because in India education has been fragmented for such a long time. You have IIITs, IITs, management institutions, it's all fragmentation. And then every institution tries to overcome the fragmentation by all kinds of other means. They want institution to be like a university with several disciplines to be addressed in one place. So these are all the aspects. And what may happen administratively, some changes will come.
Right.
Like they may put all the accreditation bodies under one broad umbrella.
Right.
Instead of calling it NAC and NBA, it is not that NAC or NBA, in my opinion, will vanish.
Right.
There will be one common accreditation body under which the NAC will look at its own institutions and its own activity, NBA are likely to, because uh, no shape has taken place how this new single accreditation body would function, because there are lots and lots of issues, because you cannot bring the architecture council under that, or um, ICMR under that. You have a whole lot of other issues. It will take its own time, but that is
Right.
secondary. But there are several other features like more and more the with regard to outcomes. The why outcome based education becomes dominant is now you are talking of credit banks. How do you accumulate credits, both for skills as well as many other things? How do you carry credits from one institute to the other, or from one country even to the other? All these issues are being addressed now.